Yes.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. Shall we start by calling attendance?
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
Present.
Board Member Willis,
Present.
Board Member McKinnon,
Present.
Board Member Wimmer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And so would we like to make an agenda change?
Let's do, it looks like public comment for items not on the agenda
Okay.
first. And then
Okay. Is there any public comment today on items that are not on the agenda?
None this morning.
Okay. So,
yeah, for agenda changes, if we could move city official reports to the end, and we'll start with the action item.
okay.
And that's all.
Okay. So should we move to just public comment on items on the agenda?
We're gonna
Normally we do this.
We're going to start off with the presentation. So if
Okay.
you can just read out the item, and then we'll start with the staff presentation and hear from the applicant, and then open it up to public comment.
Okay, so this item involves the 340 Portage site and a discussion of a historic resources inventory nomination.
Give me just a moment to look this up.
Is it necessary to read the full like title?
Yeah, actually, if you could
Should I?
read the
Okay, yes.
full
So
title, that would be
it
good.
says public hearing quasi judicial 340 Portage, then the number following it is 23 PLN-00226. Request for Historic Resources Board recommendation on residents' request for historic designation of the Cannery Building located at 200 to 404 Portage Avenue as a Category 1 or 2 resource on the city's local historic inventory. Environmental assessment exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, in accordance with CEQA guidelines section 15061B3, zoning district RM 30 multifamily residential. For more information, contact the project planner, Claire Raybold at claire.raybold@cityofpaloalto.org.
Thank you. As you noted, Claire Raybold, Senior Planner. And as you noted, the item before you today is 340 Portage, a request for designation on the local historic register. To give some brief background, Page and Turnbull prepared a historic resources evaluation as part of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan process to determine eligibility for the California Register of Historic Resources. This occurred in spring 2019. The Cannery Building at 200 to 380 Portage and the Ash Building at 3221 to 3225 Ash Street were identified as eligible for the California Register of Historic Resources under Criterion 1 events. And the HRB held a study session in July 2019 to receive information about the eligibility of the site and provide feedback on the HRE. And at that meeting, essentially the HRB concurred with the findings of the historic resources evaluation. To give some brief background on the actions that have been happening related to this property, in November 2020, Sobrato filed an SB 330 pre-application, followed by a formal application for a 91-unit townhome development. In early 2021 was the formal application. In 2021, staff requested council interpretation of the code, and council state interpretation and formed an ad hoc committee in October 2021. The ad hoc committee met from December 2021 through May 2022 and to negotiate the broad terms of the development agreement. And in June 2020, council held a closed session supporting the concept that was being presented at the time. In August 2022, council held a study session to kick off the public review process for the proposed development agreement, which is a pre-screening. And just 2 days ago, on September 12th, 2023, council approved the development agreement, making overriding considerations for a significant impact to the cannery building, a historic resource that's eligible for the California Register. So the project before you today is a request for designation as a Category 1 or Category 2 historic resource on the city's local historic inventory in accordance with Palo Alto Municipal Code Section 1649040 for local designation. The building is eligible, as I noted previously, for local designation under Criterion 1. The structure or site is identified with the lives of historic people or with important events in the city, state, or nation, primarily the agricultural history of our region. So just to briefly explain the categories for designation, because the applicant has asked for this to be placed on either as a Category 1 or Category 2 building. And so I've just kind of provided the code language that speaks to what these categories are. The report that was prepared, the HRE, evaluated the project for the California Register. So it really didn't include a conclusion of what category it may be eligible for the local register. So either a historic architect or, in the discretion of the HRB, I think there would need to be some discussion about what it would even be eligible for. There certainly have been a number of modifications to the building. I think a lot of the original character is, retained in the existing structure, but there have been a number of modifications to the building over time. So it's definitely unclear that it would be eligible for a Category 1, possibly a Category 2. However, given the council's actions on Tuesday, the 12th, the city's recommendation for this project is that council deny the request to designate the cannery building as a Category 1 or Category 2 resource on the city's local historic inventory. It was a unanimous decision to approve the development agreement, allowing the partial demolition of the historic resource. And so we would not want to turn around and ask the council to place it on our local register as it exists today, given that they have already approved the partial demolition of the structure. However, consistent with the HRB's recommendation to council, and as was included in a condition of approval of the development agreement, we would ask that you reaffirm the recommendation to evaluate the remaining building for local designation following the completion of the approved modifications to the structure. And so with that, I will turn it to the board and recommend that you hear from the applicant.
Would the applicant like to present?
Good morning. I'd like to take a few minutes to say thank you for your attention to this very, very important issue. As staff just talked to you about the development agreement, I'd like to remind the HRB is that my application has nothing to do with the development agreement. I came here today as an applicant, and if you have questions later, I hope you will reach out to me, just like you would any architect or engineer, about this project during your deliberations today. The development agreement really has nothing to do with my request. In simple terms, today it is your task to decide if you believe personally that 340 Portage, otherwise known as the Bayside Cannery, deserves to be on the city's own historic inventory, something that should have been done 4 years ago when it was discovered that it was eligible for the California Historic Resource. No city staff or no city member ever came forward. It was an individual, myself, who had to launch this campaign. Unfortunately, when the HRB last reviewed the cannery on May 25th of this year, which I attended and was here, maybe you remember, you were not given the option or the opportunity, for that matter, by city staff to make your own viewpoints known about whether you believe the cannery is historically significant or worth preserving, as the Page and Turnbull Historic Evaluation Report of April 2019 clearly indicates. Your mission on that day, if you can remember, it was to specifically look at the development agreement and whether you approved of it or not. It was not to give your viewpoint on whether this site was historic or not. I hope today you will give that viewpoint. I want to make the case that it is historically significant and worthy of preservation, not only for what occurred there over 100 years ago, but also for the individual who built it. I would encourage you, if you have a few minutes, to take a look at the poster and information on Thomas Foon Chu and his significance to this area, particularly Palo Alto. It's important to remember that there was a time in the early 20th century where there were no smartphones or silicon chips. In fact, agriculture and its related industries were the economic engines of the region and provided hundreds, if not most, of the jobs in the area. Santa Clara Valley possesses over 1,300 square miles of the most fertile and exceptionally good growing soil in the United States. By the early 1900s, the Santa Clara Valley had gained a reputation as one of the richest and best agricultural districts in the nation and the world. That's the reason it acquired the nickname, the Valley of Heart's Delight. With an ever-increasing abundance of fruits and vegetables, canning and packing companies grew alongside the acres and acres of fields and orchards. Canning became a lucrative business as foods didn't spoil in cans and could be transported great distances. I'd like to show you a short little clip video of 3 minutes that was put together by the Los Altos History Museum and the curator there. And I hope that you will have a better picture of what occurred at that time. So could you run the video? 3 minutes. I hope my time stops.
Dr. Amy Ellison, I'm the exhibition curator here at the Los Altos History Museum, and today we're talking about Silicon Valley Eats, a taste for innovation. What we really wanted to get across with this exhibit is that we've really always been innovative in this area. We think about Silicon Valley today as being this hub for technology and innovation, but really that innovation, that innovative spirit has really always been here. You can see it really clearly when you start to look at our history of food here in the Valley of Heart's Delight, or Silicon Valley, as we're called today. So a lot of these innovations that we talk about here at the museum were really, really important, not just to this area, but also all around the world. The food traveled all the way around the world, the innovations traveled around the world. So the history that we made here in Santa Clara County, in the Santa Clara Valley, was really had a global impact. So some of these that are most important to our museum, one of them that is really important is the Wizard Walnut Huller. And their company is still in existence today, but they invented a new way to hull walnuts. And if you come out to the museum, you can actually see we have the patented version of that, the prototype of the walnut huller out in our agricultural exhibit. And you can read about it here in Silicon Valley Eats as well. But that changed the way that we processed walnuts, that we eat walnuts, made it a lot easier. So that innovation changed people's lives in a lot of ways. So one of my favorite stories that we got to tell in this exhibition is the story of Thomas Foon Chu. He was actually an immigrant from China. He started out in the Bay Area. His father was a cannery owner and passed on the family business to Thomas Foon Chu, who opened a number of canneries here in Santa Clara County. And he became one of the most successful cannery operators in this area, and really one of the most successful cannery operators in the world. He was incredibly beloved by his workers. He had a very good relationship with the people that worked for him. He cared about the people that worked for him. He, unlike many other cannery operators at that time, hired people no matter what their race or ethnicity or religious beliefs were. He was very open-minded, and people loved him for that. And one of the most interesting things, the most innovative things that he did was he solved a problem that they had in canning asparagus. Because at that time it was very, very difficult to can asparagus because the stalks, they're so fragile that if you try to put them in a regular round can, they move around a lot and they end up getting really damaged. So he came up with the idea of a square can. So he became known as the Asparagus King for that innovation. So Santa Clara County, the Valley of Heart's Delight, has an incredibly rich agricultural history. By the 1970s, the Valley of Heart's Delight had become Silicon Valley.
Okay. I'd just like to go on and mention a couple things more about Thomas Foon Chu, okay? It's very important. It's because it's part of this history. It's important that we focus on the cannery building, 340 Portage. It was built in 1918, 115 years ago. A Chinese immigrant who came here with absolutely nothing, Thomas Foon Chu, purchased those 4 acres of land, and he decided to build his second cannery plant here, largely because there was access to a lot of the fruits and vegetables that he was canning. Even though this was his second cannery plant, it was a significant one. In fact, it became the largest single employer in Santa Clara Valley. I could go on and talk a lot about Thomas Foon Chu. The fact that one of the things that he did, one of his early innovations was an effort to speed up production. He devised a new method and machine to wash tomato boxes on an assembly line by flipping them over on the line and stacking them. But I think his most significant contribution was his compassion and caring for his own workers. He was very unique in his day. One example was his decision to build housing on his own property for his workers. Boy, what an innovation that would be today. Silicon workers should be able to have housing on their own company's land. That would be something. Beyond all the business challenges, Thomas Foon Chu continued his success, and he worked hard to overcome racial and discrimination barriers. But again, the Bayside Cannery continued to be successful and became the 3rd largest cannery operation in the entire world. I'd quickly like to talk a little bit about your mission today. I'd like to make sure that you understand what I'm requested, why I came here today, why I filled out the application, why I got $1,500 to have this hearing. It's because I believe that this is an historical, important site, not only for this city, but for the nation. The Chinese American communities that have experienced huge discrimination should be recognized for what they did. And physical structures like the cannery offer opportunities for future generations to see how the first immigrants that came to America survived, and not only survived, but how they flourished. Thomas Fung Chu was a very unusual man. He accomplished a great deal in his lifetime, short lifetime. He died at the young age of 43, I believe, or 42. But even in that short lifetime, he set an example for all of us as Americans that even though we come with nothing, we can accomplish great things, good things that help people and make a difference in people's lives. And that's the reason your mission today of giving your viewpoint on whether you believe this is an historical, significant building and structure. It's very important that you acknowledge that because the evidence is there. In the Page and Turnbull report, which I gave to all of you, I hope you have had a chance to read it, it clearly indicates the significance of this structure, and it should be protected. Now, what happened on Tuesday is immaterial, I believe, to what you've been tasked to do, or what I've asked this application to do, is to make sure that if you do believe it's historically significant, that you send that message back to the council, and the council will make the ending decision on whether they believe it's historically significant or not. That's their mission, to vote yes or no. Your mission is to recommend. I really believe that this is an opportunity for the Historical Resource Board to really set a precedence, and that is that there is value even in buildings that look like old factory buildings, particularly if they do provide a sense of place, especially for the Chinese American community. And I really think that's really important in our society today, with all the angst that people have against immigrants and migrants today. Finally, I'll just mention a couple things. I really think that you should agendize at some future meeting the fact that there is this office building that's next door to the cannery that should be historically protected. Its modification should not go forward. In fact, one quick.
Out of fairness to all participants, I'd like to ask you to wrap up.
Well,
because of time.
Very quickly, I'd just like to mention that at that May 25th meeting that you had, you guys asked the staff if they made modifications to the remaining building, would that impact its historical status? I think the answer was clearly yes, it would impact. It would destroy the historical impacts of that building. Okay, I hope you can consider what I said. Thank you.
Thank you. And shall we move on to public comment? Do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, just one from Dennis Backlund.
Okay. And I'd just like to say for public comment, out of fairness to all participants, I will be, tracking the time of comments.
Yeah, so Dennis?
Good morning, members of the HRB. A number of years ago, I spent 4 years on the HRB, and following that, from 2000 to 2014, I went to work in the planning department in a newly created position called Historic Preservation Planner. And so in that job. I visited sites, researched the projects, and then gave, I think, very, very complete staff reports to members of the board with recommendations of what to do and why. And so with this experience, I was a little bit ahead of the game in reviewing this most controversial and infinitely complex project that the cannery building represents. The Page and Turnbull report noted that it was significant for events, but they concluded not for persons. And that led to some very interesting review by the city. Page and Turnbull was technically correct. They said that the events of canning in the building was what was significant. As far as persons, Thomas Foon Chu, the Chinese workers at the cannery, Page and Turnbull was looking at the entire building. And other than the 1918 original, the rest of the building that was put up in the 30s and 40s was after Thomas Foon Chu's death. So the building as a whole could not be significant for persons for that technical reason. Well, what happened in the council meetings, we all know. The response of the Chinese community was one of the largest and most overwhelmingly powerful responses that we have seen to recognize the Chinese American heritage that's wrapped up in this building. I do see the 1918 section as quite a bit more important than the rest of the building. And its importance, I think, is not diminished by the fact that there's going to be 40% demolition of the later additions to the original building that was approved by the council last night. So in that 1918 building.
And that is 3 minutes. So if I could ask you to complete your comments, yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I'll just add one more sentence. That the monitor roof sections, I understand, was reviewed by the HRB and you approved a window pattern that will go in there. Sobrato told me that last night. So thank you very much for that. I think that restoration will be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have additional public comment?
Yes, one more from Eugen Lockhart.
Hello, I'm Eugen Lockhart. I'm an Olive Avenue resident. And so I've been attending many of these meetings. And I think there's been a lot of great sentiments over saving this building, whether it's whole or partial. I personally think that unfortunately removing the later additions would be appropriate. And in spirit of that, saving and preserving the older original portion, personally, I think is celebrating it more so in actually being able to approach it instead of having to walk all the way to the end of the block, all the way back and seeing a portion of the building. I think that the renovations will be appropriate. I've heard public art comments a few times and they say about having a mural, which honestly I think is a little short term. It seems like a high five in my opinion, versus placarding, a boring plaque just saying with words is also kind of boring. You know, I've been sitting here many times seeing that in my head, a whole series of, you know, images such as is on the wall here, but archived into brass or bronze or something, and actually being placed outside of the building once it's remodeled, I think would be quite nice. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then another one from Lotus Yifang.
I filled out the speaker card. It's more than just a name and what one industry at one period accomplished. The point is all of Chinese American history has been erased. And unfortunately, it is part of American history and how the immigrants from Ellis Island and Angel Island have been treated very differently. So when I spoke out of place, I mentioned Liu Hing. Liu Hing would have known Thomas Fun Chu and Thomas's father because his Pacific Coast Cannery was in Oakland and is where most of the Chinese from San Francisco, Chinatown ended up after the earthquake. So history occurs in a context, and one reason that this Palo Alto structure exists compared to the Oakland one, which shuttered down much earlier, and even Alviso, is Herbert Hoover. So you have to understand, when the Chinese railroad workers accomplished the impossible going through the Sierra Mountains, how did Stanford and the other three make their money? And how did Stanford buy the land here to get away from the working classes in San Francisco who were protesting the Big Four on Nob Hill? So we are also working with the Cantor Museum at Stanford because that history is not told. So if you want to see the original gold spike, it's in the Nathan Lane room, but the history is not only not told, it's incorrect. So right now we're going through a period of labor activism. Okay, so you're not learning history by putting a name on a street sign or a park. Okay, the Chinese have done so much that is not recognized, and that's why the violence keeps recurring. So for our children to have a sense of what their history was and what they can become, and for us to work together as a country, you have to tell the history in context. This location is perfect for a museum of Chinese heritage in California. I didn't bring my Malcolm Harris book, A History of California Capitalism in the World. But unless we deal with this, unless we look at the school boards now that are having all these culture wars about everything, okay, we're not going to progress as a country. And I think coming up to this election next year, we're going to continue with the polarization unless we start learning to talk and listen to each other, learn the correct history. You go to Berlin, you see how Germany has dealt with their difficult history. Japan has not. China has.
That's 3 minutes, so if I could ask you
Okay.
to wrap up.
Menlo Park history has the history of how the Chinese were mistreated in Menlo Park when they worked for the Stanfords.
Thank you. Do we have additional public comment or anybody commenting online?
Yes, one on Zoom from Rebecca Sanders.
Good morning. This is Becky Saunders. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. I have my granddaughter today. I had promised to take care of her. But I know that the Historic Resources Board does not want to be known for anything shocking or out of the ordinary. I mean, the last thing historic preservationists want to do is do anything shocking because we're all about tradition. The fact that this meeting is happening after the final meeting that the city council had is really just too bad, a little bit outrageous, but I just want to applaud all my friends and who are history buffs and care about preserving something more than a plaque, more than something token, more than something titular, but something to last a lifetime, to last for generations. I mean, the last thing you all want to do is to do anything to step out of line and get in trouble and have people yell at you like, what in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing, voting to advance the cause of this amazing structure? I mean, you all know, I don't have to reiterate, but I just have to say that, you could step well out of the box and just send a message. I mean, you don't have ultimate authority, but you could say, hey, let's take a second look at this. Let's not just go ahead and rush to demolish. And I mean, there's just so many moving parts to this. And I just think we have a moral obligation to slow the process down and take a really good hard look at the best use of the cannery. And is the best use of it to tear it down, to tear down 40% of it, so that makes it ineligible for so many glorious and beautiful things that could be done. And we could still have housing there. We could still have office there. But I mean, this whole thing has been handled so arse backwards that it's just too incomprehensive for me to really understand, starting with the whole NEVCAP process. That was just a bunch of window dressing. All of those people worked so hard to design a wonderful neighborhood over there. And then they were just given the total shaft by the city and the city planners, and completely ignored, and all their work swept away like so much refuse. So if I sound angry and frustrated, it's because I am. And you are our last hope. I mean, you are our last resource. If you don't say, no, the buck stops here. I'm going to just slow this down. I mean, it's not like you're going to be blowing up the world or anything catastrophic, but you're just going to say, yeah, let's give the cannery and the people a little more time. Thank you so much for your service to our city.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments?
No, that's it.
Okay. Then let's move on to board questions.
I would
Is there
just- No, I would
Oh.
just also note that, Mayor Koo is here. I don't know if you just wanted to listen in or if you wanted to say something.
So I think I appreciate all the comments from the public and also the application to reconsider the historical factor at this building. And there is absolute evidence that this is there is historical factors, but the unfortunate thing is that this is a private property, and also that it was never registered. So it's a little bit late to do that. And based on the facts that the applicant and the development agreement has shown is that they will be preserving the monitor roofs. They're keeping most part of the building. However, it's still a private building where it is going to be, they're going to rent it out for themselves. We were able to get 2,500 square feet for retail space, so that there is a way to look at the monitor roofs. And as Ms. Raybold had said, and very honestly made sure that we know that for the most part, a lot of the tear down, the demolition will make the building no longer eligible for the National Registry and the California, but maybe the local. And I don't know if there will even be any remnants, but I'm hoping that HRB will continue to monitor to see as much as possible that it is listed on the local registry. I know the applicant has asked to just look at the building. Given what the council has decided on Tuesday, and that there is the possibility of looking and considering the person as a historical significance and events, that you might want to consider what it takes to make that area a historical district. So I don't know how that would work, but I think that, as someone from the public mentioned, that Oakland has their historical areas, perhaps Palo Alto may have its historical district. So that might be something you might consider. And the buildings that the applicant mentioned that is across from the cannery might be considered within that historical district.
Well, thank you, Merku.
I have one more thing to say. I also want to be clear that there is a large contiguous parkland that came along with this negotiations, and also affordable housing. We don't know if the developer will build their 74 units of townhouses or not. We don't know yet. However, we also want to take into consideration all the other developments that are being proposed at the fish market and McDonald's site. That's going to be very high density. There's also the former Mike's Spikes place, which is, I think, 3001 El Camino. That's another low income. It's actually very deep, affordable housing, but it's also pretty dense. And it's not far away from this spot. Behind that 3001 El Camino Real, there's going to be another batch of townhouses back there, which is really at the back parking lot of the Fry's, of the former Fry's site. And then, there's the teacher housing, the academy that was pre-screened at council. And so potentially the parking lot of the former CPI site might be also dense housing. I know that the corner of El Camino and Page Mill, and I forgot those two tall buildings, they're called Palo Alto Square. There is also proposal of housing over there. So there's quite a few high density projects that are being proposed for that very location along El Camino. So I think that we want to take the whole perspective into account. At least I am taking the whole perspective, and what little we got for this parkland, 2 acres, we might be at a deficit again on parkland after all of these buildings are up. So I hope that we can look at it wholesomely. So that's why I suggest maybe instead of just a cannery, a district. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirku. Are there any additional staff comments or elements? Let's move on to questions and discussion. All right, board questions.
I guess my biggest question is, what difference would it make if we designated it a category 2 as opposed to it just being identified as it is as California Register eligible?
Great question. So I think that's where staff would say that these aren't independent. What's happening with the development agreement and the approval of that is important to what's happening here today, because bottom line is that it would not make a difference. You could designate it on our local register. HRB would make a recommendation to council, and council could put it on our local register. But essentially, it simply creates confusion because the development agreement has already been approved, and a portion of this building will be demolished, and it will lose its eligibility for the California Register in doing that. And that's what the entire environmental impact report was prepared for, and disclosed that impact, and council made overriding considerations with that understanding, and not lightly. It was made with the understanding that, everything that they were doing, what are the ways that we can help to convey the history of the site to the public, to, even though we are impacting this resource such that it's no longer going to be a historic resource, still convey that important history to the public. And ultimately, we can put it on our register, but it would just create confusion to the public because it is going to be partially demolished. And so the whole point of putting it on the register is to help to protect it more. If this had come forward in the past, well before we started the EIR process, then the evaluation for the EIR would have also noted that it's on our local register. it still would have been the same conclusion of, if the only difference would be that these findings of overriding consideration would have also noted that it's also on our local register, but it would be the same protections under CEQA, and it really actually wouldn't put further protections under for the historic resource because it's outside the downtown area. So Chapter 1649 doesn't protect it from demolition in any case. So
I just want to follow up. Every time I hear that demolishing this section of the building will make it ineligible for the register, I understand that the entire building will no longer be eligible, but because this building was built in sections, I firmly believe that the monitor roof section would stand alone as a historic resource. And is there documentation that says that is not true?
the historic resource evaluation doesn't support that conclusion, but consistent with the HRB's recommendation, we have included a condition of approval to evaluate the structure for eligibility for the California Register, the National Register, the local register following the completion of the work. And so if that evaluation concludes that it would still be eligible, the condition states that it would be nominated. The developer would be asked to nominate it for that register. So.
And under the current circumstances, if we nominated the central monitor roof portion for our inventory as it stands, connected to the other building, but would that not be, do we have evidence that that would not be a historic resource?
Yeah, what the, our analysis concluded that it would not, that we treated it as a whole structure. I think that just trying to think.
Claire, I understand that it was analyzed as an entire structure. Was it ever looked at as pieces? Because, I mean, if you just look at it as an entire structure, it's an entire structure, but it's a lot of structures with a lot of additions in between that connect them. So there's many ways of looking at this building. The fact that it's looked at as an entire building right now is actually kind of amazing over the years. But I just don't see how, I mean, if you've never analyzed it as a standalone section, then we don't have any evidence one way or the other.
I think what the analysis concluded, because the HRB had asked us to go back and to do an evaluation of essentially the Ash building and whether that would be individually eligible for the California Register without the Cannery building. And basically what, the conclusions of the analysis were that you can't evaluate the structure not as it exists today. So, you can't, look at something on how it might look in the future and then come back and say, we're going to evaluate it based on that and nominate it based on that. You have to evaluate it in its current condition. So in its current condition, it's the entirety of the structure. Now you can come back following, whatever work has been approved for the site. And once that work is complete, and determine if it's eligible and nominate it from that. But
would you like to, or I have questions as well. Either way. So what I'm hearing is that changes to this structure are an inevitability at this point. And so listing it based on its current condition would lead to a listing that isn't aligned with its future condition. Is that, I'm understanding that correctly?
that's exactly correct.
And then My other understanding is that there's going to be an opportunity to reevaluate the structure and list the structure once those changes have taken place. And that's already built in.
Yes, it was added as a condition of approval of the project that the council approved.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, congratulations to the applicant. I think we need more of this spirit in the city of Palo Alto. Of course, Dennis, you are amazing and have contributed so much to our city. So thank you for all of this effort. I think it is a struggle just because we're in the 11th hour and, now we're meeting on this where the action of the city council has already, taken place. And it's always so sad that, when these resources are lost, we realize what a tragic loss and why isn't something done about it, in time to save these things. Well, I guess that's just the challenge of historic preservation and the challenge of, our community in trying to save what's here. I think just because we've gotten this far and because we're determining that, the building is going to be, severely altered and might lose its historic kind of significance, I think that there's still a significance of place and the person there. So I really do believe that there's an opportunity to create, maybe it doesn't need to be on the National Register. It can certainly be a local historic place because of what occurred there, because of, there's also a park or a recreational area that why couldn't we require Sobrato to do a, not so much a memorial per se, but, an art installation that honors Thomas Funchu, the cannery element chapter in the city of Palo Alto. It could be all this information and all these plaques, and maybe we could have, a day that we honor city of Palo Alto. We could have a Thomas Funchu Day. I mean, why not celebrate the history in ways that isn't necessarily attached to a building that's been demolished and altered, but we're not losing the fact that this place still exists. So let's focus on the place, what happened in that place. And I think it's also great that the design of the building, although it is not what it was originally, there's a nod to what was there originally. The monitor roofs echo the building that was there. And I felt like that was a really positive thing because they could have wiped it out and put a big square box and said, they weren't obligated. I think Sobrato is trying to be sensitive. However, they have their other motivations, but I think that, the city and we would support it absolutely, is to make it a historic place just within the city of Palo Alto historic register or historic inventory. It could be, and maybe that, off topic. We've been discussing our categories. Maybe that could be one of our categories, just could be a place, a historic place where something historically significant has happened here. And when you go to that place, you can learn about it because there are plaques, there are memorial's not really the right word, I don't think. There's a monument there to celebrate it. I think that, for me, I think that's fair. I think that would be in honoring what was there, what happened there. Mr. Chu, and I love his story, and I think we should continue to tell his story. In fact, I kind of thought, wow, that would be a great movie, just because it really, there's so much there's in that story that it's an important story to continue to tell, and hopefully the city of Palo Alto can continue to tell that story.
Well, and to add to this, also in a previous HRB meeting, we did discuss the potential for this site to be eligible for something like a point of historical interest or California landmark designation. And it sounded like it did retain eligibility for those potentially.
We don't know that they will, but that was part of the condition, was essentially that it'll just include a evaluation for kind of a broad range of things: California landmark, National Register, California Register, and whatnot. local register, and then nominate for anything that it is eligible for was the requirement.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So it says in our packet that because the development agreement has been approved by the city council, it does say that 340 Portage is already protected as a historic resource in accordance with CEQA. So it is a protected resource. So how do we make that fact work for us in this situation, that it is protected? So how are we protecting it?
So my point in that is that the code section that is being used today to evaluate for local designation, we essentially wrote in this allowance to get something to the Historic Resources Board quickly and to allow somebody to designate something if there is an ongoing application that includes demolition of the historic resource. We have a certain time period to get it to the HRB and then to make a recommendation to council. And really the point of including that is there are structures in the city that maybe are not protected under CEQA, or you might only need a demolition permit, for example, certain single family residences. And so there are some loopholes that have been utilized in the past in the code, which I think we actually cleaned up some of that in last year to help protect from that in other ways. But in any case, that provision in the code was really put in there to help give council discretion in those scenarios and bring it to their attention and allow for a discretionary action, which then requires evaluation under CEQA for that discretionary action. And so some single family residences, if they weren't on a register or something, it creates this protection where you have to go through an EIR process if you determine that it does have some historic character, creating an opportunity for the city to make a decision. In this case, it was already protected in the sense that it required public disclosure, a full EIR process, and findings of overriding consideration. And so council, in their deliberations, did not make the decision to demo the resource or partially demolish this resource without that public disclosure or without that understanding. And so this is kind of a unique situation where, this is not a scenario where, putting it on our local register would suddenly require additional work on behalf of the city and for council to be able to make their determinations. And so again, they've already made the determination with that full understanding. CEQA really, the word protect, it doesn't stop you from demolishing a resource, but it requires that full disclosure and public process if you are choosing to do that and to make overriding considerations, which the council did.
So, based on everything that we've discussed today and, the history of this project and moving forward, I think the solution is to make it a historic place and memorialize that with some kind of monument or some kind of physical piece of information that people can go and learn. We can learn about what happened there. So how do we, with that concept, how could we make that happen? I know that the city has an art commission committee that maybe it could be an art installation. I know that's out of our purview, but how is this not lost? I guess that's my question.
And I believe that there is an art plan for the site that incorporates this.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to speak a little bit to that, because Board Member Wimber, you did bring up some questions about the public art. So there was discussion at council. So there's I want to say it's about $850,000 in public art for this project. And so that's coming from the art that's required for the cannery restoration. That triggers the art and private development. And so it did, about half of it comes from that cannery building renovation and is being used on the site. Our understanding is that they're expecting to install some form of mural, but it's going to the Public Art Commission. I believe it was currently scheduled, I think for 9/21, but they may have pushed it back. I'm not sure. I think they're making some maybe some changes in their concept, and they haven't released that concept to us yet of what they're thinking about. But that's going to come before the Public Art Commission soon. There's also for that cannery site, a mitigation measure that was included that requires an interpretive display. And we specifically made it an interpretive display versus a plaque because an interpretive display gives a little bit more flexibility. It might include more than just wording. It might include pictures or something along those lines. And so I know that the developer Sobrato is already kind of working with a historic group that specifically prepares these kind of things to come up with a concept of what that's going to entail. And my understanding is there's also supposed to be, and they're using some of the public art funds to do some of the interior as well of the publicly accessible area and do something on the interior there. The remaining funds they've chosen from the townhomes is going to be paid in lieu. And so that is basically goes into a fund and the public art, it's in the Public Arts Commission's discretion to decide how those funds are used. Now, council in their motion asked for that to basically come before the council. And so the way the code is written, I think essentially, while the council doesn't really have the discretion to specifically say what the public art must entail or even where it's located, it gives the discretion of agendizing it for council's consideration and feedback. And so I think that's what we would intend to do with how that in lieu art is being used. Anytime we do a public project, it includes a public art component anyway. And so in redesigning a public park, certainly we would be looking to place some public art on that site in any case. And I think while we can't specifically state what that must entail, there's certainly an understanding, and the city has discretion since it's our in lieu funds in kind of what that might entail. And I think there's an expectation that it would convey the history of the site.
Are there comments from the board? Additional questions, comments? Go for it.
So first I want to say thanks. It's nice to see the community, some community interest in preservation. So often we feel like we're sort of out here by ourselves. And I want to encourage you all. We have been very remiss in these buildings that have been identified as California Register eligible and are not on our inventory. There's like 160 of them floating out there in the community. Hopefully soon we will having public meetings and getting them on our inventory. And I would like to encourage you all to pick your favorites and lobby for them. I think there's a need in Palo Alto to rejuvenate our interest in our history and our public buildings and our preservation. I think I would like us to look at the monitor roof section as separate. I know it's all on one property. There are no property lines like there would be in an urban townhouse environment, but Certainly, the monitor roof section is identifiable in historic pictures that, yes, it has been added onto. And I know that it's not a traditional interpretation of a building, but I would like to see us now make a statement that the monitor roof section of the building is eligible for our inventory. And I don't think there's anything specifically in our inventory definition that says we cannot designate a portion of a building as historic. I'm confident, very confident, that in the future, unless something drastic happens to that building, even more than the wing being removed, actually, I think the wing being removed would make the monitor roof section more defensible. And I would like to actually see separation on the other side too. But, you know, in the future. So I'd like to encourage the board to nominate the monitor roof section for our inventory. And I have a few other comments that are a little more general. And one is that I know that housing is probably pretty sad, the townhouse housing, but in the future, I'd like to see, well, one, a little more land planning in the region, but two, that, you know, when there's a project up against a historic resource, that I think it would be nice if there's some effort from the developer to respect that resource. And I know in some ways there is, but personally, I think that the townhouses look like they were, you know, cut out of some other environment and plopped down on a land plan. And hearing about all the development that's going to happen in the region, I think that we really need to make an effort in Palo Alto to do some comprehensive land planning, because this little plop, 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 plop is not going to get us where we want to go. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry. And I don't know how we get ourselves there. I know we don't have the staff on planning to do that, but we need to seriously focus on how we're going to develop Palo Alto over the next 10 years. And I think it's, you know, really upsetting that it's just piecemeal. So thank you again for showing up. I hope you will continue to have interest in preservation in Palo Alto. And I want to beg the board to step out of the box and designate the monitor roof section to our inventory.
Okay, so I'd like to comment. Thank you all for your participation and for acknowledging and, you know, caring about historic preservation. That's really appreciated, and it's wonderful to see in the community. So thank you. Regarding this particular project, the world is how it is right now. You know, there's the situation is already what it is. Decisions have already been made. And so I don't think we can designate based on a hypothetical look for the sculpture or the structure. If we were to designate anything now, it wouldn't indicate the final disposition and appearance and significance of the building. But we do have pretty significant provisions to designate and to look at how it could be eligible and how the resource could be acknowledged once those modifications have been made. You know, there's an opportunity to look at that monitor roof section when it's the monitor roof section in its totality as it is then. You know, it's already written in. There's going to be a time and a place to do that. And so I think because the structure is going to change, I would like to see it evaluated once it's in a form that it's going to remain in. So I don't think we can, knowing that a change is going to occur, I don't think designating anything right now is going to reflect or be accurate for how it will be in the long term.
I mean, I kind of agree with Elisa and the fact that, and we've discussed this many times about what's, original and historic and what mimics historic. So one of our rules is that we don't want to confuse people. And I'm afraid if we designated the monitors as historic, people would think that those were that was the original structure, where in fact, it's nowhere near the original structure. So, I mean, that's what goes through my head is, that's why I just think designating this as a historic place. But, talk about the monitors, say that, and have, I think through the history, we still thankfully have retained not enough photos, but key photos that show what was historically there, which I think all of that information should come out in this art installation or presentation or monument kind of depiction of the history. I just think that we need to wait until it's completed, have the historic review done after it's completed. I'm pretty sure I already know what the historic report will say, but we just can't confuse people. We can make it clear that historically there were these roof monitors, and we echo that in the current building as a nod to the history of the buildings and of the site. I think that's, for me, that makes the most sense. But to nominate them as historic, I think gets confusing and could be misleading. But I love your idea and your effort to push this forward in that way.
I don't feel like it would be that confusing. I mean, it has, the monitors have been altered, but yeah, what hasn't in 100 and some years? I think that by nominating to our local inventory, and I think we have a lot of flexibility on what we put on our local inventory. I think we analyzed it as far as California Register, National Register eligible after the fact, after the construction. But to me, to put it on our local inventory now as a section of the building would make a statement to, the current owners, the future owners, the occupants, the people designing the park, the people designing the affordable housing. To me, it is a statement out there that says, yes, we care about this particular symbol of this particular activity that happened at this point in our history. And I think there's, I think if we wait, obviously, the townhouses were designed before we said anything. And if we wait longer, the park will be designed before we make a statement. The affordable housing will be designed before we make a statement. Alterations to the building will happen before we make a statement. And I don't see the harm.
Are you thinking of nominating it as it is today, like in the existing condition, or nominating it, acknowledging it that it's going to be different?
Because I would say, like, nominating it, once it's different, I think that's the hope. That's the hope that we nominate it then. But nominating it now, I think, creates confusion and problems and concern, but it can be looked at then, absolutely, and as the monitor roof section, the evaluation that's planned, I think, can do that.
I wish I'd brought a picture where, it's a more prominent standalone section. And we've all seen it, but I did not bring that part of the packet. And I understand I don't have support here. But
I mean, I'm sure you can, and I'm sure you can nominate it. I think there's some, that's like an application and there's some procedure that happens after you nominate it. You can't just nominate it and it automatically becomes historic, right? So you can nominate it. I think it can go through whatever steps it takes. And I guess it'll eventually, the process will eventually,
So
I don't know.
the HRB's recommendation today will go before the council. So it's recommending it and then council's decision would be final on whether to designate it or not. But again, from all the discussions we had related to the development agreement, what our historic architect told us is you can't nominate and designate something in a condition that it doesn't exist in today. So it either needs to be designated based on its existing condition, which we have the evaluation for based on the Page and Turnbull report, or you evaluate and nominate based on its condition once work is completed on the project. And so nominating it based on a piece of it in a condition it doesn't exist in today, we don't have an evaluation for that piece to support that nomination and designation. And
So Claire, your position, well, the historic architect's position is without a property line, there's no definition between the buildings. Because I can tell you, the monitor roof building was a building and it was added onto with other buildings the way an urban environment, like University Avenue, building next door, it's a different property line. So it's that distinction that these additions and sort of successive building is all on the same property. So therefore, there's no ability to separate it out.
it's all the same it's all part of the same building now. It's all part of the same building and all developed during the period of significance. So.
Can I ask a question? So along the way, when they're working on the building, especially the monitor roof section, does it come back to HRB for oversight or to make sure that it still keeps some of its integrity? What is the process?
It's not coming back to the HRB in the process, but they are required to develop it consistent with what they've said they're going to do in their plan sets, which is keeping the structure. I know it's not going to be an easy process. I know that they are going to have things on the interior to hold up the walls while they make modifications to the roof. But they are, committed to doing that. I know a piece of it includes restoration of those monitor roofs. Right now, they're all boarded up on the windows. So as Mr. Becklin mentioned, they are restoring all of those windows to its original condition. So it's going to be quite a process, and it is the city's role to provide oversight. Part of that is in reviewing the building permits and making sure all the notes are included in the building permits to ensure that what they're saying they're going to do is what they're proposing in their building permit, and then oversight during the construction process to oversee how they're doing it. And we have our standard process. Our building inspectors are going out at multiple points in the process doing inspections of the work. So it's a complete seismic retrofit of the building as part of the process too. Yeah, does that answer your question, I think?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if HRB has any oversight through the process, through the replacement and all the repairs of the monitor roof so that they can at least assure its integrity to some degree.
Yeah,
and that it can be
yeah.
later perhaps preserved or registered as Caroline said.
Yeah, yeah.
So is there any of that in place?
There's no HRB oversight during the process. We hope that in the plan set that they've prepared and that we have approved, and more detail of which would be provided as part of the building permit, that they are preserving enough to maintain its integrity. Now, the full EIR concluded that we don't think it's going to be eligible for the California Register afterward, but we're still going to evaluate it again to determine that. Local register we have much more broad discretion in that, in determining whether we want to put it on that register. It's really an honorific component. It doesn't really do much in terms of preserving it any more than the historic maintenance covenant that's required would preserve it. But it would be an honorific status for the building to kind of, identify it to the community as a local status. So-
Another question is on the materials that's used, when you said that the monitor roofs, the windows are going to be replaced, the materials used, are they according to Secretary standards, or is it repair, replacement? At what point does it no longer even is of original material?
It will be in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards. So what they plan to do is to evaluate what windows can be used, if any. If they can be used, it would be repairing them. If they can't be used, it would be replacing in kind. And either way, like the Secretary of Interior standards requires repair where feasible or replacement in kind where not feasible.
Thank you.
Board Member McKeenan, I want to make sure you have the opportunity to comment since you're participating remotely.
Thank you. I guess if you're soliciting comments, I think that the building should be recognized in its current state as a local resource. I disagree with a lot of the comments have been made that we had our chance to speak up before. We really didn't get this issue properly surfaced up until today when it finally came to the head. But some of these decisions that have been made should have been made after we could have weighed in with a more appropriate decision.
Okay, thank you so much. So are we required to make a motion?
I think given the way that the wording of the code is stated, we'd like to have you make a motion today that we can bring forward to the council for decision.
All right. Yeah, so,
Amy, you want to,
oh, go
do you
ahead.
have a recommendation for what we should, does staff have a recommendation for what we should do at this point?
You're welcome to, Member Willis, make a motion along the lines that you were thinking and see if you get a second. Or alternatively,
I can put up staff's recommended motion.
yeah, put up staff recommended motion.
But you
and-
can choose to.
Okay, I'm going for it.
That should be one of the factors to consider who is going to make the first motion.
So I would like to move that we recommend that the central part of the cannery building with the monitor roofs be designated as a local landmark on our, as a category 2. on our local inventory. Want a second, brave enough to second me?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, shall we vote?
Yes. Chair Eagleston Cheslowich.
Sorry, is there,
Oh, no, so
Can-
I was just asking Amy if she could make sure she's taking the motion since I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Can you repeat the motion?
It was shorthand, but putting the central part of the building with the monitor roof on the local inventory. There's no recommendation as to what category, I guess, and no state. And
I was going
did you say
category 2.
okay, and there was no statement about the portion of the period of significance or anything. I didn't hear that.
Right. I wish I had my original, I don't have the EIR in front of me, but yes, the period of significance obviously would need to be adjusted. And also it would be, yeah. I can't remember the dates on that one in either.
I mean, the period of significance relates to its use as a cannery, which is why it's been determined to be historic. As Mr. Backlund noted, it was determined that it's actually not, it's related to the events and the cannery's role in the events in the agricultural industry in this region that makes it historic. So I'm not clear how we would reassess the period of significance and what that would be based on.
I don't think we have a way of doing this.
Well, I know there's a photo where the monitor roof section of the building is very prominent, and there are additions on either side. Oh, thank you very much. So there you go. So again, not a date, but I do feel like that if we designated that, I know it's severely altered at this point. But for me, it's an important statement, and I think I can personally, I can justify the category 2 by, I mean, it really speaks to what our history was before we were Silicon Valley. We were not always Silicon Valley. we started out totally, well, not totally different, you know, we started out a valley that was focused on agriculture. And I think this is very symbolic of our history. So for me, I think there's my designation. And if it goes to council, I think we can find some dates to associate with this portion of the building. But I think it's very clear that this was a major part of the cannery business and structure, and I have no trouble defending it.
Can I make a friendly amendment to your motion? Please. I would do something more broad sweeping and say, I move that after we've received the information today from the public, that we encourage the city council to consider this as a historic place with a monument, art remembrance piece, and also consider nominating the monitor part of the structure as a category 2 historic element to be placed on the City of Palo Alto local register. I know that needs to be cleaned up.
I think we do better. I mean, I think council has already made, everybody, you know, I think there's a clear comment that we're going to have a history portrayed in visible ways that aren't necessarily preservation, that there are exhibits and, you know, sculpture and, well, I don't know if it's sculpture, but public art. So to me, I think if we're taking it to council, let's just take it pretty cleanly as this one thing, and not muddy the waters. you know?
But I don't think, I mean, I think we're here today because of the applicant and because of the site and because of the history on the site, and not for one structural element of building. I think we have to consider the broad sweeping project, and your motion is only looking at the monitors. That's how I'm reading it. I think it needs to be all inclusive of what the sentiment is of the applicant today, not just the monitors.
Then maybe
Unless
that's
I'm
two separate things.
misunderstanding.
And it might just to be two separate items.
I don't know. I mean, I see your motion, but I think your motion is very narrow on the monitor, on making these monitors historic.
Yeah,
I love the sentiment, but I feel like that's not the gist of what is happening today, or is it? I don't.
I'm having trouble. Like, I don't think we can designate a building based on a hypothetical, I don't think we can designate a partial structure. I don't think that's something we can or have done. I also don't think that we can, designate a building now knowing that it's going to be modified. The changes are going to happen, so I don't think we can designate it now knowing that that's going to happen, then change the whole situation. I don't know. I am fully supportive of reevaluating it after the inevitable changes, and of, designating it to like the greatest extent of what's possible. But I just don't know if we can do that now.
Right.
Is it possible to make a comment?
Well, I think it might be helpful because I think you have a point, Board Member Wimmer, in that it seems like the applicant's proposal is really to, is what you're responding to. And do we designate the structure as it exists today, I think is the request. So maybe if
Is that
speak to that.
permissible?
Say that again.
Is allowing public comment at this point permissible?
He's the applicant, so if you would like to hear from him, it's at your discretion.
Okay, sure. 3 minutes.
That's the element that is most significant, not only to the Chinese community, but to people so that they can see how the cannery actually was built and see how it actually was, how the manufacturing process went. I think preserving at least the monitor roof section is critical, is an important part of the future of our city, I think.
Okay, thank you. And so, but the monitor roof section, it will be preserved, correct? So everybody's on the same page.
Correct. That's part of the portion that would remain. So,
Okay, just one more time. What's the projected timeline on this project being finished?
the cannery portion or the full development agreement? The development agreement is over a 10-year period. The cannery portion and rehabilitation would happen within the first 2 years. They plan to submit, following completion of council's, there's still ordinances that require a second reading at council, but council's decision last night following that, they would start submitting building permits for that and for the parking structure. It'll be about a 2-year process before the demolition can occur, I would say.
So we have 2 years in a holding pattern.
Maybe less.
Then we have construction. Well, it happens. And in the meantime, there's no planning on the park. There's no planning on the affordable housing. I mean, to me, I think these things will be happening concurrently. That the site, the total site will be looked at and reevaluated. And plans made for how the park is oriented, how the housing is oriented. And to me, calling out that central part that is very symbolic, to me at least, of the way factories were done with the natural light and the size and the scale. I mean, yes, by the 1940s, it was a large thing, but certainly, you know, in the early days, you know, the monitor roof section is much more in keeping with the scale of what that kind of operation would have been. So again, I feel strongly that, you know, we have an opportunity here. It's our local inventory. It's not the National Register. We have an opportunity to alert the people planning the park, the people planning the affordable housing, people modifying any parking out front or, you know, traffic patterns or signage or anything for the cannery building. And we have an opportunity to alert them that this is the part of the building that we consider symbolic of the whole operation, you know, the whole history of the site. So we, at this point, do not have a prayer of maintaining the whole building. And truthfully, you know, I think it's rendition by the 1941 is not really the one we want to preserve. I think that for me, the earlier history, which is just part of the evolution, but the cannery building, the monitor roof section, I think that is a much more legible building to convey what we want. And I know that it will be modified. I know, you know, windows that we put in, you know, it's probably not going to be eligible for the National Register, but having it on our local inventory has a story preserved in our local inventory. And I think we need to start maintaining this local inventory and use it. You know, that people should be able to go to our inventory and read the history of Palo Alto. And okay, you know, some buildings were lost, stamp demolish across it, but don't wipe out the history. You know, leave the stories. So I really think we've got an opportunity. And I don't see any downside in designating this for our local inventory. And if council squishes it, they squish it. But I think we should support it.
I also just kind of want to raise the issue. I know we are talking about nominating some other properties for the historic inventory. You know, I don't know if this, yeah, I want us to make sure that we have a consistent process. And I think looking at this in isolation of that process is, you know, I think we maybe need to look at it more holistically, because there is a question of how to send these nominations to council in a consistent way.
I might just add, we have an applicant, we have an actual request from the applicant for this nomination. And so you've departed from what's been requested and started off on a new motion from Chair Willis. So we're going to have to address what's been requested and get that into a vote for council. So someone will have to.
So really the specific question at hand is to designate this structure as it is right now as a category 1 or 2.
Correct.
Yes.
That's really the recommendation. Now, we do have a motion on the table that has been seconded. So I think we do have to take.
Well, either vote on that or propose a substitute motion, I believe is that's what council does. So, but there's a motion on the table, yes. So you can vote on that, but it's not what the applicant requested.
I think, you know, we can vote on that motion, but I think we should also be making a motion or on the applicant's request. Yeah.
But the specific request was to designate the structure as a category 1 or category 2. is asking the applicant, I mean,
No.
no, I'm being asked to ask the applicant for an alternative. I don't know if we
I
can
think
do
you
that.
have
That's
what
not
you
what we
need
have
to.
before us, right?
I think what you have, what you need to make a to make a motion if you wanted to do an alternative motion to the motion that's on the table. But there is a motion on the table that is not what was requested from the applicant.
So, okay, so back to the motion on the table, and I'll make another friendly amendment. It's just because the applicant's asking us specifically to nominate it as a category 1 or a category 2. And I think we've already discussed today that it doesn't probably qualify for 1. So maybe the motion could say, we would like to move forward with nominating the structure as a category 2 building, and specifically call out the monitor section of the building to be the most historically significant. Instead of just focusing on the monitor, do the entire building, nominate the entire building, but call out the specific character defining feature of the monitor. So not just the monitor, the building, and then also have the vocabulary to call out the monitor. How's that?
Was that a substitute? Friendly amendment?
That was my very confusing friendly amendment.
Okay. Trying to think. So, no, I'm gonna think the entire building. Oof. I think it's gonna be hard for council to bite that one.
I totally agree. I mean, also in the context of their vote on Tuesday, I don't think.
I mean, I think mine has a chance with council. Chance?
Yes, I don't think she can speak to that.
But I truthfully, I would have a very hard time asking council to nominate the whole structure as it currently stands. And I am not looking at that as one building. I know it's all connected, but to me, it's little historic parts. So yeah.
I mean, what about standing by our original recommendation to evaluate the property after development? I mean, and just saying, this is required. It is our fervent hope that we do that. And would it be possible to include further language in that request that addresses the monitor roof specifically? Would that be helpful?
I think the best we can get out of this is to designate the part we really think is the strongest historic building element, and to make it clear to the development that's going to happen around it that this is what we care about. And I think if we wait until the construction is done, that a lot of other planning will happen in the meantime. And as you can hear from Claire and from what we've read historically and what keeps being repeated to us, people look at this as an entire building, and they assume that because the analysis has not been done for sections of the building, they assume that it's not going to be eligible for historic status after this right wing has been removed. So when the Park Avenue section is removed, there's an assumption out there in the community that we've heard time and time and time again, even from preservationists, that this building will not be eligible for the National Register. And I think, okay, it's going to be a reach on the National Register, I acknowledge, but not so much California or our local. And I think that our mission here is to make a point to the developer, people that are establishing development that's happening around this. And granted, it would have been better to do this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but to make a point to the developers of the parcels around the parkland and the affordable housing, that this is the piece we're gonna make a stand on. And to me, that is really the only thing we're going to get. I mean, it's an important thing to get out of this. And I think that, you know, maybe it will be effective, maybe it won't. But I think we have to try. And anything else, I don't really see as doing anything.
Okay, so I'm warming up to this actually. And then I think we should also include that secondary building, right? Because there's two buildings. There's the Ash building. There's that little secondary building that he's also asking for. So do you want to include that? No, okay.
Yeah.
Wait, why wouldn't you include that? Because that's more likely to be.
So again, I think actually that maybe speaks to Mayor Ku's suggestion about something like a historic district. However, I think that may be beyond the scope of what we're doing today. But I do have the sense that that's something that could be potentially considered at, you know, at the, you know, end of construction, when the property could be evaluated for all kinds of things. And that a district designation or something like that would include like the Ash property as well. I don't know if.
Yeah, I see the Ash property in a historic district as a different, I mean, I have, for one, have not done the research on a historic district in that area. So, but the visual evidence to me for the monitor roofs and the history that we do know, I know, you know, we're missing a lot of it, but the history we do know, to me, I think that supports designated the central, what is now the central portion of the building, but was previously a standalone section of the building.
I guess there's the question of that doesn't fully respond to, or it doesn't respond to the question at hand, but I think there is a way of incorporating that into what occurs with the structure in the future in terms of its evaluation.
I mean, if you feel like we need a second motion to not designate the entire building, go for it. But I feel like this one is our action item, you know, what we could take out and what I think actually would bring about some positive reactions. Or, you know, I mean, I don't think it's not unresponsive, you know, it's just not totally, I mean, council's always given people pieces of things. We're giving them a piece.
If I may, you know, I think that staff really is looking for a recommendation one way or another on the whole building. That doesn't, so we would ask that the start of your motion include either a recommendation to approve or to deny for the whole building. But that doesn't preclude you from adding additional portions to the motion to say that while you may be denying or recommending approval of the structure as a whole, here's other parts of our recommendation.
Okay, Claire. So in order to do that, I would like to have a picture of the building with the dates for the different things. Do you have that available? Because I think I could easily do that if I had the sections and the dates, but I can't, I don't know how I would phrase it now.
What about something that suggests we would like to stand by our original recommendation to evaluate the structure following construction? But then to also consider, like to, you know, consider as part of that, the designation of the monitor roof structure.
Claire wants an up or down on whether we designate the entire structure, right?
I think that that should be the first part of your motion, and you may add other portions to the motion about.
So if I did have dates, I think I could easily.
What are the dates? The dates of the alteration of the existing building?
But it sounds like we're almost addressing like a secondary question. And it sounds as though there is not currently support for designating the building in its entirety. Yeah, and that's,
Well, I think that we can.
that's it.
I think we can carefully word that in the motion where we say, in response to the applicant, we would like to designate the whole building, but more specifically, we would like to designate the character defining feature of the building, which is the monitor roof.
I think we can designate a partial structure.
Mm.
So it's really how we incorporate that component, you know, into a motion, but I think it has to be considered as part of its future state, you know, state, which it's not at yet. So we can't designate it as a future state.
Right.
You know, and so it's how do we incorporate that future into a motion now? Because we can't designate the future.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
So an amendment. So we look to have the property reevaluated in its state after construction. I didn't do that right. I'm not feeling very eloquent here. Evaluate the remaining structure after completion of construction, and in the interim, designate the monitor portion of the building for our local registry or something like that.
I guess I'm not comfortable designating a partial building. I'm not convinced that that's something we can do.
You have to see it as a building in and of itself.
Wait, I thought the motion that you just, I should say as a friendly amendment, I thought it did include reevaluate the remaining structure. Is that?
I'll repeat back what I heard. The revised motion is we would like the remaining structure reevaluated after completion of construction, and in the interim designate the monitor portion of the building as a
Historic reference, what are we going to call it? Something structure on our local inventory. Okay, you want to call it a historic piece structure?
Yeah, we've never designated a portion of a building, you know,
Do that.
the character defining features as the structure that is listed. So that's.
I think if it had not existed as a separate structure previously, I would support you. But because it was originally a separate structure, I think we need to just kind of look into the past. And I think, yes, it's not going to be on the National Register with its sidewalls blown out and added to, but it's very visible. You know, if you look at the roof pattern, you can identify that. I don't want to say original because I don't think it was the first piece built, but you can identify that early portion of the building as a separate structure. And because other structures were added to it, does not take away the fact that it was in and of itself a separate structure.
But it's not currently. And I think that's.
It's not
the-
held up by the rest. You could demolish the rest and it would still be standing.
But
Or-
it'll actually be more in that form after construction. You know, it'll.
And
it'll be
if you
closer to
promise
that.
me that nobody will do any planning for the site between now and whenever that happens, I am fine.
What
But
are let's ask about that.
We certainly would be starting the process. We wouldn't want to wait to start planning for the park process, you know, and other things. Yeah,
So for the developer to change that monitor roof section, that would require a significant additional process since that design has already been approved and it's been decided that that portion is being retained, right?
Yeah.
The,
correct, yeah,
okay.
Good development.
yeah.
And I just want to make the point that it's the developer of that particular parcel. That developer is not designing the park.
But the city is designing the park and.
Is the city somebody that's actually here present tonight, listening? I mean, this morning. I mean,
we are
if you're going to
the
hire
city.
somebody to do it, right? Aren't you going to hire somebody to
No,
design a park?
we have a park planner in our public works division that would be, yeah, I mean, we would certainly, we might be working with additional consultants, but I mean, the
Okay.
city would retain the authority and would be the property owner and make the determinations, you know.
Okay, so maybe I'm just making the statement to the city on the parkland and affordable housing. How would that be designed?
Presumably, we'd be working with a nonprofit. The city, I think, would expect to retain the land and would be working with a developer, nonprofit developer for the affordable housing.
Okay.
I mean, I just feel like maybe we don't have all the information we need to really craft this in a sensible way. So maybe we roll all this energy into saying we want this to be a historic district, or I'm still feeling like making it a historic place. I think there's a lot more promise in that we create this whole site. It's a historic site.
I mean,
and we memorialize it with some kind of art.
I mean, would it be reasonable then to, you know, essentially stand by our original recommendation, but emphasize that that recommendation involves this reevaluation of the structure post-construction for inclusion on the national register, you know, the state register, points of interest, our local register, and, you know, can we add that district category? Can we add like a recommendation that be included in the future?
So.
Yeah.
Can you speak
You
on
need to speak in the
into the
microphone.
microphone, please?
I'm telling her what to do.
Oh, that definitely needs to be on the
Still needs to be
mic.
on the mic.
Okay, so I'm suggesting to Alyssa that she call a motion because I don't have support. She's
So
not gonna.
we have a motion on the table.
Well, I meant
and
she
so we
call a
do
vote
need-
on the motion.
Okay.
Call a motion on the vote that's on the floor, on the motion that's on the floor, and get rid of it because she's not going to support me. And there's only 4. So, hey. And then move forward with a new one.
But do we know what motion stood? I mean, it has been revised over time, so.
I guess, sorry, the only other thing we could do is re-agendize this item when we have more of our board members present, because they might have some brilliant ideas.
I think, aren't we required to
Although that's
respond?
just kicking the
Yeah.
can down the road.
Yeah, we're required to
Okay.
respond. Yeah.
I think we can reevaluate it later too. I mean, the whole historic district, whatever. But I do think we're sort of stuck. So,
All right.
and I think the only motion that had a second was the first one. So we just go back to my first one that Mike seconded, and then we move on from there.
That's a second.
So the original motion was that move that the central part of the building with the monitor roof be placed on the local inventory as a category 2. And that was seconded by Mike. That was
Okay,
the motion.
let's take a vote on that.
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
No.
Board Member McKinnon,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer,
Yes.
I believe motion carries 3-1.
No, sorry, the motion fails if it's a
Fails.
2-2 vote.
It's,
Yeah. So the motion just carried.
Yeah, it was a 3-1.
Yeah, that was a 3-1.
Okay.
And so now, now I guess the next step is to discuss what the applicant proposed, right? As a recommendation to council on that.
sorry, so I guess the due motion would be to address the structure in its entirety. So I will move to not advance the nomination of the structure in its entirety as a category 1 or 2 on the local inventory.
I'll second that.
Discussion?
Wait, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
So is to move to not advance the nomination of the property as a category 1 or 2 on the local inventory.
The property or the building? Are we
I guess
talking about the
the-
site or the?
No, it's the,
The
I think it's
building.
the 340 Portage specifically.
It should be actually, well, the request actually was for both structures, 340 Portage and the Ash Building.
The Ash, okay, so it's, okay, so can I amend that to move to not advance the nomination of either 340 Portage or, what's the Ash address? The 3225 Ash Street as a category 1 or category 2 on the historic inventory.
Oh, we have that. Is there, no, we did have a second, I believe, as revised.
Yes.
Okay, so now there's a vote for that.
Could you repeat the motion again, please?
I'll say it. Now, the motion is to not advance the nomination of either 340 Portage or 3225 Ash as category 1 or category 2 on the local historic inventory.
Is it, and discussion?
What's the reasoning behind that? Just because you don't think that they qualify?
So the reasoning is that designating the entire building under the current circumstances is going to lead to confusion and problems down the road, and a designation that doesn't match the eventual disposition of the building, which really cannot be changed at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Possibly, I'll just restate it and I'll put a parenthetical to make sure it's clear. The motion is to not advance the nomination of either 340 Portage as an entire building and I guess, or 3225 Ash as a category 1 or 2, category 2 resource on the local historic inventory. Does that capture it? To throw in the entire building?
Yes, I think that makes it clear. I think we have a second. So I think unless, is there additional discussion?
Does the seconder accept the amendment, I guess? Okay.
All right. Vote time?
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon,
No.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer,
Yes.
motion carries 3-1.
All right, is that everything?
Yes.
All right,
I believe so.
and I don't believe, oh, Mariku, do you
Well,
have?
I was just gonna say, before you adjourn, there's question, comments, and announcements.
Yes, and we actually, at the beginning of the agenda, moved the city official report. So just a reminder that we'll
Oh, right.
move to
Okay,
that next.
let's move on to that.
Okay. Yes, so we have canceled the September 28th. We have stated we're canceling that. It was kind of open just in case there needed to be additional discussion, but we're canceling that. The next meeting is October 12th. We have Vice Chair Roman absent. And then we have planned a community meeting, an evening meeting, 6 p.m. on October 24th to take up again the historic reconnaissance survey and next steps, which is to discuss the nominations to the local inventory and categories. And then given that we're looking at a Tuesday evening meeting on the 24th, we're canceling the meeting 2 days later. That's the regular date, the 26th. And so that's our next meetings.
So Amy, when we, prior to the community meeting, can we get kind of a little summary of how it's going to play out? Is that possible?
There'll be a staff report. Yeah.
Prior to the meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
A packet a week before. And we can discuss it on if you'd like to agendize discussion on the October 12th meeting. You're the chair, I guess,
All right.
in advance of the meeting.
Any additional questions or announcements? Anything else? No? Get a motion? Oh, yes. Mayor Chu.
Actually, I'm sorry. I would like to ask you to consider in the future that you look at some of the commercial properties that might have historical significance and do it ahead of time, identifying them, so we don't have this process happen again. Thank you.
Any other? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Can I second? I'll second. Can I second? Yeah. Okay, I'll second. All right. All in favor?
Aye. So Amy, do you need